Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS. If you hear or see dogs running in the background, you'll know why. But anyway, so in today's video, I'm going to basically talk about sort of the some tips, I guess, to being a budget Yu-Gi-Oh player. Some things you kind of have to accept, and some tips for, maybe having a little bit more fun when you are. So the first thing is to accept that as a budget Yu-Gi-Oh player, you aren't always really going to win. Unfortunately, Yu-Gi-Oh can feel like a pay-to-win game. The best decks tend to also be the most expensive ones, and we all know that's probably not coincidence. The thing here to know is that as a budget player, you're not going to have a deck that necessarily competes with meta decks, but you should also accept the fact that that shouldn't really be your goal to begin with. As a budget player, you should just be playing the game largely more for fun than for competition, and if you kind of accept that, it's a lot more fun. And I find that it's also a lot more fun to not, don't go into realms where you're not going to do well. So, if you know that you're playing, say, your Battery Man deck, or, whatever kind of lower tier Melodious or Aqua Actress deck or something like that, don't, enter a regional where you know that the field is going to be nothing but like Klee and Nekraz and Shaddoll and stuff. That's just kind of common sense, and that's kind of been a rule throughout Yu-Gi-Oh history, and it will always be a rule. So even when this video is, outdated in terms of what decks I'm talking about, the premise will always be there. Don't take, your $20 budget deck into a regional with people who paid hundreds of dollars for theirs and expect to do well. You'll be disappointed, but it's easier to just avoid that altogether. Unless, of course, you are really teched out, really practiced, then it's fun to like beat meta decks, but just don't be one of the players who complains or kind of gets frustrated when you don't win. That's just how Yu-Gi-Oh is. The next thing is, as a budget player, accepting lower rarities of cards is something that you're gonna have to do. I know there are rarity whores, but you can't really be a budget player and be a rarity whore. That's kind of just how it goes. Unfortunately, most cards don't even like come in multiple rarities when they're first released, but that kind of will get into my next tip. But just know that there's nothing wrong with having common versions of cards or like, reprint versions of cards. It's fine, they're cheaper, you'll save money, you'll be able to build decks a lot easier. In fact, I think that the disparity between like a high rarity deck and a low rarity version of the same deck is really, really high. So, or really, really large, I should say. So don't be afraid to accept like common versions of stuff. It's totally cool. And that brings me to my next tip, which is waiting is usually your best friend. As a budget player, know that if a deck that you want to play is currently expensive, it will be cheaper likely within the next several months. Konami, especially in recent years, has been doing a really great job of reprinting things. We've gotten last year's Mega 10s, we're getting more Mega 10s this year, but we've also gotten things like Star Pack, Battle Pack, Gold Series. If you're willing to wait, most cards will get reprinted. We don't even know exactly what's in the Mega 10s yet, but we can be reasonably sure it's going to be a lot of today's top tier decks, so Teller Knights, Burning Abyss, a lot of Shaddoll stuff, and also just other cards that have been pricey, like Madolche and Jelly, for example. They're pretty likely to be in there. So if there's a certain card or a certain deck that you're looking for, waiting is usually your best friend. Even if there's not necessarily a reprint coming out of a card, usually prices tend to decrease naturally, and so that's kind of another thing to keep in mind. The next tip is to find substitute cards. Unfortunately, there are certain cards that are just really expensive and aren't necessarily going to get reprinted soon, and you'll have to accept the fact that you're going to need to find lower rarity versions, but also just outright substitutes for those cards. There are a lot of examples, and I honestly probably should have thought of more before I made the video. For example, let's think one real quick. Solemn Warning. When it was first released, Solemn Warning was only Ultra and Ultimate. It came in D-Revs, kind of hard to pull, was worth a lot of money, like $30, $40, $50. It even got higher than that. And if you wanted to run Solemn Warning, you just kind of couldn't. It hadn't been reprinted. We didn't know if there's going to be a reprint. This is kind of a period of time where reprints weren't as common as they are today. And so if you wanted sort of an equal to Warning, you just had to settle for maybe a Black Horn of Heaven or just something like that. It's not fair exactly, but that's just how Yu-Gi-Oh is. And there's nothing wrong with having to settle for lower rarity versions of cards. There was a period of time where Seven Tools the Bandit was kind of the poor man's Dark Bribe, or Pot of Duality when it was released and it got up to nearly $200. You just kind of had to settle for like Gold Sark or Upstart. And so That's okay, but just know that as a budget player, it's something you kind of have to accept and deal with, and sometimes it's fine. Sometimes the substitute versions of the cards might actually work better for you, but it's just something to keep in mind. And last but not least, I would say, as a budget player, be ready to buy like deck cores. Buying decks kind of by the deck is one of the tips that I've always liked when I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I didn't really want to spend a lot of money. I found it easier, instead of trying to collect like individual pieces of cards, or pieces of decks, like, oh, let me get this card here, this card here. I found it easier to just find people who are trying to sell a deck altogether and just kind of buying it from them that way. Your mileage may vary, of course, by like local, where you live, things like that. But I found it to be a pretty useful tip just to kind of like find somebody who's, say, getting rid of their whole Harpy deck, or, you know, getting rid of their whole Batteryman core. And, you know, just kind of do that. And as long as you have staples and some extra deck cards that kind of go, because like a lot of extra deck cards are universal, they just go with a lot of decks. I find it easier to just buy deck cores than to try to, like, you know, get one card from this guy, one card from this guy, and trade a lot. It can be more difficult that way. So those are some of my tips for budget Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm sure there are loads more. In fact, I'd like you guys to share them in the comments. If you're a budget Yu-Gi-Oh! Player and you kind of have some tools of the trade that you wouldn't mind sharing, that'd be great, because not all of us have loads of money. So there's, you know, lots of ways to kind of play Yu-Gi-Oh! And not break your bank. So that's the video for today. Hope you guys liked it. Remember, I'm giving away a box, first edition, of Clash of Rebellion, newest Yu-Gi-Oh! Set. If you want a chance to win that, check out the description of this video where you can enter the giveaway. All you have to do is be subscribed to the channel, but you can get extra entries by like following me on Twitter, liking the Facebook page, things like that. It's really cool. Well, anyways, like the video, leave that comment, and subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! We'll catch you guys later. See ya.